Secret deployment, grid-based movement, bluffing and deduction, memory and capture the flag. Despite this system being one of the most dominant throughout the 20th century, it doesn't have a name. Gamers have a shared language for the games they love. Deck builders, area control, roll and write. No such jargon for this family of tactical, grid-based, military-themed games. We could name the system after its most prominent iteration, the Stratego mechanism, in a similar manner to the way we describe certain dice games as using the Yahtzee mechanism. But that feels like an injustice, since Stratego was far from the first, and certainly not the most innovative entry in the genre. The Gunjin mechanism feels more apt, referencing the likely progenitor of the system, but it's a totally unfamiliar reference for Western audiences. Perhaps we need a mechanical term, but there are many ingredients in this particular recipe. What's the standout feature? Secret deployment is central to the gameplay, but widely used in other wargames and strategic board games which share few other features. I'm at a bit of a loss. Deduction battle games? Deductive duel has a pleasing alliteration. I'm Adam Porter. I design games and I review them on this channel. And if you like what I do, please subscribe, comment, and share the video. In my Game Design Hall of Fame series, I pick out games that I love, which have undeniably proven themselves as titans in the industry. Sushi Go, Viticulture, King Domino, Carcassonne, Everdell. And Stratego undoubtedly qualifies, though it wasn't this iteration of the system that I first fell in love with. Some of my fondest gaming memories are of sitting down for lengthy sessions of Dover Patrol with my dad. Dover Patrol was his childhood favourite, and of course, with decades of practice, he was unbeatable. The core of the mechanism will be instantly familiar to fans of Stratego. Two players secretly line up their pieces on opposite sides of a grid. You can see the value of your own force, but you don't know the value of your opponent's pieces, which face away from you. When two pieces meet back to back, you can declare an attack, and the values are revealed, with the lowest scoring piece eliminated from the game. The goal is to progress through the enemy ranks and capture their flag. The origins of this iconic game system are unclear. A German literary journal, Monatshefte, described a Japanese wargame known as Gunjin Shogi, or military chess, in 1905. The game was subsequently published in Finland in 1906 and described as having been invented during the recent Japanese War, most likely the Sino-Japanese War of 1894, and enjoyed by soldiers and officers alike. Gunjin Shogi is remarkably similar to later titles, L'Attaque and Stratego, with the most notable difference being the requirement for a third player to act as arbiter, declaring the outcome of any conflict without revealing the identity of the pieces. Patents were filed in 1907 in London by Julie Berg and 1909 in France by Hermance Edan. It was Edan's version which achieved commercial success in Europe under the title L'Attaque. However, the origins of L'Attaque are disputed because Edan's estate asserts that she invented the game in the 1880s, which, if accurate, may predate the Japanese wargame. Another variant, Luzhanqi, or land battle chess, is widely played across China, and it has the trappings of an ancient game, though it actually appears to be a relatively new invention, having appeared somewhere around the mid-1900s. Edan's L'Attaque was brought to the United Kingdom by Gibson's Games in the 1920s, and it attracted 3 direct sequels, Dover Patrol, Aviation and TacTiki, all apparently developed by Harry Gibson. These games were marketed as Gibson's Big Four, or War Without Tears. Stratego first appeared in 1946. Late to the party by about half a century, and almost identical to Hermance Edan's L'Attaque, though a Dutchman, Jacques Johann Mogendorf, claimed to be the creator. Stratego was licensed to some heavy hitters in the industry, Milton Bradley, Hasbro and Jumbo, which still retains the ownership of the brand in 2023. The Stratego branded version dominated the market in the West, pushing through to become one of the most recognisable, iconic board games of the last century. Many modern board games have utilised the core game system over the last few decades. And of course, there have been a wide variety of Stratego branded re-implementations, including TV and film tie-ins, simplified versions, a complex historical simulation, and a collectible version with variable unit abilities. Meanwhile, in Japan, Gunjin Shogi is still widely played, with many different variants incorporating most of the various evolutions that we've seen in the Gibson series and the Stratego range. So variable boards, variable abilities, and variable army distribution. In China, Luzhanqi is still a mainstream classic, and the Philippines has its own beloved version too, the Game of Generals. Very few modern board games have benefited from this degree of cross-pollination across continents. Older games like Parcheesi and Backgammon perhaps, but Stratego feels fresher, a stepping stone between traditional abstract games and modern strategic titles. So what is it about this system that makes it so engaging, and does it hold up after over a century on the market? Well, the one thing that deductive duel games achieve better than any other, to my mind at least, is the ability to lay traps for your opponent. There are a few gaming moments as satisfying as convincing your opponent that your low-valued piece is actually a prize to be won, guarding it and moving it across the grid with your opponent's piece in pursuit, only to reveal that they were chasing a decoy. Even better if you can manipulate them into attacking a mine, eliminating one of their most powerful pieces because they thought they had located your commander or your flag. The aspect of the game which feels a little more dated is the pacing. The setup takes considerable time, with players considering many options, and for the first portion of the game, the board is so cramped there's little that the players can do apart from carrying out arbitrary attacks to eliminate the front line and start to drive a wedge through the opposing force. It's in the mid-game that the game becomes more tactical and deductive, but you often have to grind a little bit before you get there. The older games in the family don't adhere to one of the core tenets of modern game design. The game should be fun from the very first turn. That said, I'm quite happy to give these older games a pass. They were way ahead of their time and outclassed their competitors enormously. L'Attaque was brought to the UK only a decade or so later than Snakes and Ladders. So let's get into the details. What are the differences between L'Attaque and its more famous imitator, Stratego? Well, honestly, there are very few meaningful differences. The games feature playing pieces with similar names and abilities, though the distribution is ever so slightly altered. L'Attaque uses a grid 9 squares wide, 10 squares deep, and Stratego uses a slightly less cramped 10 by 10 grid, though the 2 central lakes are larger than the 3 lakes featured in L'Attaque. In some editions, the ranking is reversed so that the lower numbers beat the higher numbers. And that's about it for the differences. Everything else is identical. The highest powered piece, the commander, defeats all others except for the lowest powered piece, the spy, which can defeat the commander. The 8 scouts, valued 2, can move any distance in an uninterrupted straight line and are frequently sacrificed to reveal the value of an opponent's piece. Mines remain static after initial deployment and defeat any piece which attacks them, except for the sappers, valued 3, which are the only piece that can eliminate a mine. And the game is won when one player attacks their opponent's flag. One substantial change in L'Attaque from the earlier Gunjin Shogi is the requirement to reveal the 2 pieces involved in a battle. In the Japanese game and later Eastern adaptations, a 3rd player acts as arbiter, checking the pieces involved in a battle and declaring the winner, but taking no other part in gameplay. Hence, neither winner or loser learns the identity of the opposing piece, though they can progressively deduce the value of the opposing pieces based on the outcome of successive conflicts. L'Attaque was reworked in 1996 by Roger Hayworth and packaged as a tie-in for a popular British TV series Sharpe, starring Sean Bean. Sharpe's attack uses a larger board with a central river with more crossing points than the earlier game. The spy and scout abilities are remixed in this later game. The special agent is similar to L'Attaque's spy, except that instead of only defeating the commander, it defeats the highest valued piece in play. So if the 10 has already been defeated by a mine, here called a readout, or by another commander, the special agent can now defeat the 9, 8, 7 and so on, depending on which pieces remain on the board. In Sharpe's attack, it's the special agent which can move any number of spaces, not the scouts, leaving the highest valued pieces vulnerable to a sudden attack from a distance. In Sharpe's attack, the scouts, valued 2, are not defeated when they attack a higher valued piece. They are, however, defeated if they attack an equivalent piece, or if they're attacked by a higher valued piece themselves. They don't benefit from the ability to move long distances, as in the earlier game, since that ability has transferred to the special agent. But we're way ahead of ourselves. Sharpe's attack is actually the 5th L'Attaque sequel from Gibson's games. The aforementioned Dover Patrol was the first direct sequel. Published around the same time, it's a game of comparable simplicity to L'Attaque, with a slightly larger board with no inaccessible spaces. There is, however, a harbour wall, which you cannot move through, limiting access to the base, where each player's flag is located. And the goal of the game is not just to capture the enemy flag, but also to carry it back to your own base. And once collected, it can be passed between adjacent playing pieces. If a piece is defeated while carrying the flag, the attacker takes control of the flag. And to win the game, you must have both flags on your own base. This of course results in a longer game than L'Attaque, but the rulebook does list 4 shorter variant goals. The basic rules are the same as L'Attaque. Movements are orthogonal, never diagonal, and attacks are optional. In Dover Patrol, the mines activate as soon as you move alongside them, as opposed to L'Attaque, where they only activate if they're attacked. Mine sweepers act like the sappers of the earlier game. These are the only pieces which can defeat a mine. Mine layers are floating mines. They can move but never attack. They can only be sunk by a destroyer, which is valued 4. Submarines are similar to the commanders from L'Attaque in that they defeat all pieces except for the low-valued motor torpedo boats, which defeat them. The flying boat is unaffected by mines, and it can ignore the harbour wall. And as such, it's largely used to capture the flag, which sits on the base behind the wall. The flying boat can jump over a mine, moving 2 spaces, but in doing so, it reveals its identity. The second sequel, Aviation, released in 1925 and sometimes labelled Battle of Britain, is a step up in complexity from L'Attaque and Dover Patrol. The board in Aviation is the same size as that used for Dover Patrol, but there are 2 additional pieces per player. Each side of the board features 2 aerodrome spaces, and the goal is to land a troop carrier in your opponent's aerodrome to win the game. In most circumstances, troop carriers cannot be eliminated. If they're defeated in a battle, they're simply returned to the owner's aerodrome. Troop carriers are unusual in that they're the only pieces which are allowed to move diagonally. Anti-aircraft guns function like mines in L'Attaque, except that they can move, rather like the mine layers in Dover Patrol. They are, however, limited to moving within their own half of the board, and anti-aircraft guns are primarily used in conjunction with searchlights. Now, when a searchlight attacks an opposing piece and there's a gun within range, it can shoot the opposing piece down. And the guns have ranges of 3, 4 or 5 spaces, and the spaces between them and the target must not be obstructed. So this is the first example of a line of sight mechanism that I'm aware of, predating any other games listed as featuring line of sight on the Board Game Geek database by almost 2 decades. But I'm not a wargame historian, so I can't vouch for the accuracy of the BGG database. Searchlights can only be destroyed by reconnaissance planes, and observation balloons function like static searchlights and can be destroyed by reconnaissance planes and bombers. With Aviation, the system has become complex enough that it's pretty tough to memorise the different interactions between the playing pieces. But the system is about to get more complex still. 1925 also saw the release of a 3rd sequel, TacTics, an amalgamation of L'Attaque, Dover Patrol and Aviation featuring land, sea and air units. The board is now considerably larger, featuring a 12 by 12 grid with a substantial portion representing the sea, rivers and lakes, and each player having 56 pieces compared to 36 in L'Attaque, 40 in Dover Patrol and 42 in Aviation. The aim of the game is to either move infantry onto the opponent's headquarters or move a ship onto their naval base. Infantry and naval units are not restricted to moving over land and sea. Any piece could move anywhere. But a piece attacked when moving out of its element, for example a ship moving across land, will automatically be defeated. A ship can only move onto an opponent's naval base by moving down the river, and whilst on the river, a ship can defeat any land piece with the exception of heavy artillery. Searchlights function like L'Attaque scouts in that they can move any distance in a straight line, and while they can reveal the identity of the other pieces, they never defeat them. At this point, the system of interactions is really complex, and it requires a table to check the outcome of any given encounter. And even this doesn't give the ultimate answer, because some outcomes are altered depending on whether the attacking pieces are on land or at sea, or attacking across the coastline or from the river. The fourth sequel by Gibson's Games, the fantasy-themed Swords and Wizardry, came 55 years later. The goal of the game is to reveal your opponent's princess, who starts on one of the castles in their side of the board. But the question is, which one? In this game, when you win an attack, your piece is moved into the space vacated by the defeated piece. However, this doesn't happen if you survive a conflict as defender, or if you attack with a siege catapult. In Swords and Wizardry, the pieces are not numbered. As in TacTics, an attack table is consulted to determine the outcome of any conflict. The king is strong against humans, but it's weak against monsters. The hero is strong against monsters, but overcome by military forces. The peasants are the least powerful pieces, but as in most of these games, they're able to defeat some of the most powerful pieces, the king and the hero. The princess is unable to attack and will be rescued if attacked by any piece except peasants or monsters. And the dragon can jump over a piece obstructing its way, and it can fly over the lake. The ogre is the least powerful monster piece, but its value is enhanced while in a forest. And the siege catapult can be used in two ways. It can attack the piece directly in front of it, consulting the attack table, or attack a piece 2 spaces in front of it, revealing the piece but never defeating it. If a siege catapult attacks a piece on a castle, the defender is always eliminated unless that piece is the princess. Pieces on the castle can otherwise only be defeated if the opponent completely surrounds the castle with their own pieces. In this game, the wizard is awarded the ability of L'Attaque's scouts, or Sharpe's attacks special agents, in that it can move any distance. Conflicts with wizards are resolved with the roll of a die. On a 5 or a 6, the wizard defeats any piece. A 3 or a 4 defeats all non-monster pieces, a 2 defeats peasants, and a 1 results in the wizard being eliminated. If 2 wizards are in conflict, the highest roller wins. Now, with all these interactions, the game becomes difficult to learn, and it's not surprising that the simplest of the family, Stratego, has become the evergreen title in the series. After exploring all the various sequels, Stratego and its near-identical twin, L'Attaque, feel beautifully streamlined. But there does exist an even more streamlined adaptation. Released in the same year as Swords and Wizardry, The Generals does away with conflict tables, and it doesn't require a third player as arbiter. The grid is smaller, 8 by 9, and each player has only 21 pieces, 15 less than in L'Attaque. The game has 2 different win conditions. Either capture your opponent's flag, or move your own flag to your opponent's back row. The Generals is similar to Stratego in that it features a numeric ranking system, with the lowest ranked piece, the private, able to defeat the most powerful piece, the agent. The Generals, however, doesn't feature any other special pieces. No pieces can move more than a single space. There are no mines, no sappers, and the flag can be moved freely. Attacks are made by moving into the opponent's space from any direction, front, back, or side to side. And when you attack, you mark the space being competed over with an attack marker. Then both battling pieces are removed and pressed onto an electronic arbiter to find out the results of the conflict. The identities are not revealed, and the winner is positioned in the marked space. The fact that the values remain hidden even after a battle is resolved, as with the early Asian games in the genre, increases the deductive element of the game system. In winning or losing a battle, the player has gained some information about their opponent's piece, what it might be, but they can't be sure. The Generals is developed from Sofronio H. Passler's 1972 design, The Game of Generals, the dominant example of the deductive duel family in the Philippines. And inevitably, Stratego had its own electronic implementation just 2 years later, using a system remarkably similar to the Generals. One final classic title worthy of discussion is Luzhanqi, or Chinese Land Battle Chess. Of unknown origin, but probably arising in the mid-20th century, this game has undoubtedly been stirred into the mix somewhere along the way, contributing to the cross-pollination and evolution of the genre. And it has some fascinating twists on the Western games, most notably in the manner in which the different grid locations open up new strategic opportunities for the players. Now, you'll notice that I've marked the pieces to make it easier to play. In land battle chess, pieces can move up, down, left or right as in the other games that I've described, but certain spaces allow you to move diagonally. And if you're positioned on a circular campsite, you cannot be attacked. And a railroad surrounds the outside of the board, along which pieces can move as far as they wish, so long as their progress is unobstructed and without going around a corner. Only the engineers can break this rule and travel around corners. Each player's flag is positioned on one of their 2 headquarters at the start of the game, and the goal is to locate and attack the flag belonging to your opponent. In one variant rule set, if your commander is defeated, you must reveal the location of your flag to the other player. The game features static mines, which can only be defeated by engineers, and grenades are movable pieces which defeat all other pieces, but they are themselves eliminated in the process. So they're often moved onto the campsites where they can remain undetonated until they're needed. In another variant, if you attack the wrong headquarters, the one without the flag, your piece is forced to remain on that space. And the intention is that the game should involve a third player who determines the outcome of the conflicts. But where this isn't possible, players do frequently play without an arbiter, revealing their pieces after a conflict in a similar manner to Stratego. Some even prefer to play with all pieces revealed from the outset, transforming the game into a perfect information strategy game like chess. There's a popular 4-player version available where players form teams sitting opposite each other and work together to capture both of the opposing team's flags. Stratego has also experimented with 4-player editions, the most recent being Stratego Conquest by Jim and Lucy Kiefer and Nick Hayes. First notable thing about Conquest is the cleverly engineered game pieces, designed such that they can only be seen straight on, and they aren't easily viewed from the side. Unlike other games in this video, Conquest doesn't use a grid. Instead, players select their starting positions on a disordered map in turn order. On your turn, you can move one unit to an adjacent zone. If it contains an enemy unit, a battle occurs. These are resolved in the conventional manner. The lowest rank, the spy master, can defeat the highest rank, the king. Mines are called cursed lands and function in the usual way, and the sorceress is the equivalent of the sapper, the only piece which can defeat a cursed land. And scouts, valued 2, can move across any number of unoccupied zones. You can move one additional piece on your turn per city zone that you occupy, and if you're the only player in a territory, you take the corresponding territory token to indicate that it's under your control. And the number of territories you control, halved, determines the number of action cards that you can draw on your turn. You select one of these to play and discard the rest. And these cards have a variety of effects, allowing you to bring a random unit onto the board, or swap the locations of existing units, look at opponents' units, or take additional moves. When your flag has been captured, you continue to play, and you're able to regain your flag by capturing the flag of the opponent who previously captured yours. The goal is to be the last player remaining with an uncaptured flag. There are several modern games which don't carry the Stratego branding, but utilise very similar mechanisms. In Shadows in Kyoto, when you attack, only the defender's piece is revealed. Win or lose, the attacker's piece remains hidden. The goal is to capture both your opponent's pieces with a red dot, indicating that they carry secret intelligence. But you also win if your opponent captures 3 of your 4 pieces without a dot, or if you manage to move one of your red dotted pieces to the opposite end of the board. Moves are determined by playing cards from a hand of locations and tactics, allowing you to swap positions of your pawns, move long distances, or push back opposing pieces. And the advanced game features asymmetric powers and a catch-up mechanism whereby you gain a special one-off ability whenever one of your important pieces is captured. Shadows in Kyoto is a much quicker game than most in the genre, adopting the same approach as other modern iterations: fewer pieces and card-driven turns. There are opportunities here for a degree of bluffing and some nice combos to pull off with the tactics cards, but it does feel insubstantial when compared to the weightier early games in the genre. There are a few other modern games which I'd love to try, but I haven't yet had a chance. In Knizia's Lord of the Rings, the Confrontation, the 2 armies are entirely asymmetric with unique abilities on each piece. For example, many of the Fellowship pieces have the ability to retreat from a battle. Additional cards can be played to determine the outcome of conflicts, including cards which boost the strength value of a piece. The endgame conditions are asymmetric too. The Fellowship wins if Frodo enters Mordor, the Sauron player wins if 3 of his pieces are in the Shire, or if Frodo is defeated. In the card game Thunder and Lightning, previously known as Hera and Zeus, players play cards into rows and columns to bring them into conflict with their opponents. When a card is eliminated, all other cards in the column are moved forward to fill the gap. In Volto, each playing piece can move in a different way like chess, but the identities of the pieces are hidden. So if you identify and capture your opponent's king piece, here called the candidate, you win. But you also win if you manipulate your opponent into inadvertently capturing both your ladies. In TacTiki, you can move your playing pieces such that they stack on top of each other, and when such a column enters into a conflict, the uppermost piece battles first, and then the next level of the column, and so on until one player's column is entirely eliminated. Confusion, espionage and deception in the Cold War pulls a Hanabi, or since this is an Adam in Wales video, pulls a Pikoko, and flips the mechanism on its head. In this game you can see the movement capabilities of your opponent's pieces, but you can't see the abilities of your own. You have to deduce these as you play. Despite the massive number of variations on this core mechanism, as the most prominent iteration, it's Stratego that sits in my Game Design Hall of Fame as a placeholder for the wider family of deductive duel games. Are there any other hidden gems in the genre which I haven't considered, but I really ought to try? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, you might like my deep dive into the world of abstract strategy games, or perhaps you'd like to see a similar exploration of the Carcassonne game system featuring many of its sequels and variants. Follow the links.